Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. And on today's episode, another topic that I'm getting asked a lot about online is how do you choose a good overland vehicle? Or is such and such a vehicle good for overlanding? And well, it turns out I've got a bit of experience. I built my first little vehicle to drive to Argentina. I built this thing to drive all the way around Africa. And with any luck, I'm going to start designing and building another one here pretty soon for new adventures. So if you've wondered how do you select a platform and what kind of criteria help you decide on a good overland vehicle to meet your needs, stick around. I'm going to get into all the details right now. So before we get caught up in particular brands or particular models, it's really important to go all the way back to the basics. And what I find is when you ask these questions, they might not help you right away choose a vehicle, but they're going to help eliminate vehicles. And so slowly the list of potentials will just get shorter and shorter and shorter until there's only one or two remaining. And that's going to be how you choose your vehicle. So the very first question, and the most fundamental of all, is how many people are going overlanding in this vehicle? So when I designed my first one, I knew I was going solo, so I didn't need anything big. This one here was designed for 2 people to go around Africa for 3 years. Again, it doesn't need to be a large vehicle. But it's really important to note, if I was going to be 3 people or more, my choice would be totally different. This pop-up roof only really sleeps 2 people. I pulled out the back seat and built interior storage, so I can't even legally transport more than 2 people. So right away, think about how many people are going with you on this overland trip that you're thinking about, and that's going to help you cull out whatever size vehicle is not appropriate. You know, a single cab pickup isn't going to work if you're 3 people, so you can just knock those off your list. Secondly, I think it's really important to think about where are you planning on going. I mean, if you're heading out for weekend trips, it's probably not that critical. But if you're going for week trips, 2 weeks, start getting into month-long trips, if you're heading up into Alaska, multi-months, hopefully one day, you know, head down towards Central America and South America, potentially trips that last years, that's when it becomes really critical to think about where you're going, and so then therefore what are your vehicle needs. I said in the gas versus diesel video, you can't take a modern diesel into the undeveloped world, so you can immediately strike those off your list if you're planning on driving to South America or down into Africa. Also worth remembering, if you're going to be on the road for months at a time, you want to be comfortable, you want to enjoy your trip. So you want a vehicle that where you sleep, where you cook, where you eat and hang out is actually going to be enjoyable, even if it's thumping rain or freezing cold or if the mosquitoes are horrible. So remember, when you're out for a weekend, dealing with some mud and whatever and sleeping on the ground, it's not that big of a deal because you know you're going to be home on Sunday night, you can have a hot shower and you can sit on the couch and unwind. But picture that there is no home to go back to. Picture you don't have that access to a hot shower or a space to warm up. How happy are you going to be in a little 2-door Jeep like mine where you get stuck outside for every single day for 2 years? Trust me, it got old. So that's why I built this thing with way more creature comforts, because I was going on an extended trip and I wanted to be comfortable. So the kinds of places you're thinking about going are also going to shape your vehicle choice a lot and really play a big part in what you decide. The next thing that people always want to talk about, but which actually isn't that important, is do you need 4-wheel drive? And I think this comes up all the time because so many people are kind of on the blurry line between 4-wheel driving and overlanding, and they're coming into this from a 4-wheel drive background. So they've been building big Jeeps with massive tires and skid plates and, you know, all the off-road goodies. And now they've thrown a rooftop tent on top and they say, hey, I'm going overlanding. But that's not typically how it goes, and that's not actually going to be very useful for you if you go on a multi-month or a multi-year trip, especially when you get remote. What you have to remember is when you're in Bolivia, when you're in the Congo, you don't use 4-wheel drive like it's fun. You're not out there with your friends enjoying yourself driving over some enormous rock or through some big mud pit. Every time you do that, in the back of your mind, you're thinking vehicle preservation is key. If I can drive around the big mud pit and not even use four-wheel drive, that's ideal. That is in fact the goal. The goal isn't to go four-wheel driving. So having said that, no, you absolutely do not need four-wheel drive. Plenty of people have driven around the world without four-wheel drive, and they can have enormous adventures. So you really need to think about, what kind of trip do you want to have? That's what matters. If you're a person who loves four-wheel driving and loves getting to insanely remote places, and you're comfortable, driving in tricky situations and sand and using your winch and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, you probably want to have four-wheel drive, partially just because you enjoy it. And that's why I spec'd this thing out. But if you're a person who, you're not really a car person, you don't really go four-wheel driving for the fun of it, then no, don't get a four-wheel drive because you don't need one. So you're gonna love the street food, you're gonna love the culture and meeting people. You're still gonna get to go to like amazing waterfalls and volcanoes and rivers and lakes and oceans, and you'll get to stunning, beautiful places. But there will be times where, someone with a vehicle like mine might get to drive out into the sand dunes, and you'll just have to park at the sand dunes and walk up to get your photo. Is that really such a big compromise? No, it isn't. So when it comes to do you need four-wheel drive, the answer is clearly no. It's more about what kind of trip do you want to have. If you're a person that loves four-wheel driving, then yeah, you're probably going to have one. But if you're a person who that's not really your passion or something you're too excited about, then no, two-wheel drive is perfectly fine for you. Another thing to consider is the weather based on where you're headed. So, I built this for the hot conditions in Africa, and I'm really happy that I got to sleep upstairs and have a breeze. Sleeping in the vehicle really wasn't appealing for all the heat and humidity for me in Africa. But if I was hanging out in northern Canada in the summer, sleeping in the vehicle would actually be perfectly fine. It would be warmer and, I'm out in the vehicle away from the bears. But that being said, if I knew I was heading into really cold temperatures, this vehicle is not appropriate at all. It doesn't have any kind of heater. I'm sleeping under canvas. I can't cook inside because of my stove setup and because of how small it is. So there's no doubt about it. If I was heading up into the Arctic in winter, I would want a vehicle with much more interior space. In fact, I probably would either get a van or I would get a pickup with a slide-in camper. Simply because the weather is going to dictate how much space I want and how comfortable I want to be when I'm up there in that kind of weather. So think long and hard about the weather, where you're headed, and that's going to dictate your vehicle choice as much as anything else. And where you're going will also determine what is a good vehicle choice based on whether it's a world vehicle and parts availability. So tons of people always mention the Tacoma and say you should get one of those. What they don't realize is that's not a world vehicle. That engine and transmission and chassis basically isn't sold anywhere else in the world. So if you take it over to Africa or if you're down in South America, you're not easily going to find parts for it and people aren't going to be able to work on it. So that's something that I would think long and hard about. Part of the reason I chose this Wrangler with this engine is because in every country that has Jeep, they sold this identical Wrangler. Same setup exactly. So although Jeep isn't the most common brand worldwide, where it does exist, there are parts for this vehicle. That's something you really want to consider, and do some research and Google whether or not the vehicle you're thinking about exists in the places you want to take it. Another thing you really want to think about is aftermarket parts availability. So depending on what you want to do to your vehicle, if you want to add a pop-up roof or you want to add some sort of kitchen setup or whatever, have a look around and see what exists on the market for that particular vehicle. So the best example I can give you is, the new Bronco that's coming out next year. Everyone's excited, tons of people have pre-ordered it. But let's be honest, there isn't going to be a lot of aftermarket support for the first couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, before all of the different companies, they have suspension and wheels and, there'll be a pop-up roof for it eventually. But that's not going to come right away. So if you're one of the first to buy one of these new Broncos, don't expect to be able to buy tons of parts for it right away. Whereas if you buy a vehicle that's been around for 5 or 10 years, hint, hint, there's going to be a whole bunch of parts available for it. And lots of people have already done interesting overland modifications that you can learn from, you can improve upon as you copy it to your own needs. And of course, it's also really important to think about your budget and whether or not it's worth getting a new vehicle. So for most people, a new vehicle means payments. And if you have payments, chances are then you can't not go to work. So having a new vehicle with payments means you probably can't take 3 months off to drive up to Alaska. So then is that new vehicle actually very good? Maybe you'd be better off to buy something used for a few grand. Then you don't have payments. You can throw all that extra money in a savings account, and a couple of years from now, you'll be able to skimp off 3 months and scoot up to Alaska and have a big adventure. So budget obviously plays a huge part, especially if you're really focused on actually using this vehicle and getting out and having bigger scale adventures. Yeah, if you're just sneaking out for the weekend, probably doesn't matter that much, but if your goal is legitimately longer term overlanding, really think about whether those payments are worth it and whether it's worth getting a brand new shiny vehicle, or if you should put that money towards actual adventures and using the vehicle. So tons of people want me to give them advice on a particular vehicle or what they should buy. But as you can see, there's so many factors that go into it. It's really hard to answer that directly and say, yes, I think this particular vehicle is good for overlanding, because everybody overlands different. There's always a different number of people, you're always going to different places, and you have different needs. And some people want to get remote and four-wheel drive on the sand dunes, and some people couldn't care less and they'd rather be in a town and eat street food. So it really is up to you. It's your own personal preferences, and hopefully this video helps you ask these questions, get some answers, and that should help you eliminate vehicles from the potential list. It mightn't help you pick the exact one, but it's definitely going to help you get rid of all of the noise and all of those other ones that aren't going to work for what you need. So let me know if this has been helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions or anything else you want me to follow up on. As always, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel for more videos, and I'm always looking for topics. So if you've got questions, if you want to know something about my trips or overlanding or what I've done or what you can learn from what I've done, please ask a question down below and I'll film a future video about it. So as always, thanks very much for watching, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.